Welcome back, everyone. It's time for our 12 News Legal Deep Dive, where we take a look at cases making national headlines. In entertainment news, more drama continues to unfold in the ongoing Hollywood lawsuit between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, co-stars in the movie It Ends With Us. Now, back in December, Lively sued Baldoni, accusing him of sexual harassment and a smear campaign to destroy her reputation. Baldoni, he countersued both Lively and her husband, Ryan Reynolds, for $400 million. And just this week, Baldoni's legal team released footage of raw video of a slow dance scene with Lively to show what it was really like on set. So joining me now is criminal defense attorney Hector Diaz of Diaz Law. All right, Hector, this blockbuster lawsuit, if you will, I mean, you know, celebs filing lawsuits over sexual harassment, that's nothing new. But what is it about this case that just seems so explosive and just so ugly?
Right. I think it has to do with the investigative report that the New York Times did. It was, you know, they basically went, interviewed a bunch of people, and came to the conclusion that Baldoni and his PR team were engaged in a smear campaign against Lively. And that's what really, I think, ramped up the tensions. I know the movie's called It Ends With Us.
Right.
This is going to end in court.
Which is about domestic violence,
yeah, and
you know, ironically. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think Baldoni has no option but to dig in. He feels like my reputation is at stake. He has retained a very notable entertainment lawyer in Southern California, who both sides are going what's called scorched earth, which is the gloves are off.
Yeah.
We are going full-blown litigation. You know, lawsuits have been filed back and forth. They're in the Southern District of New York and Federal District Court, which is, you know, that's real deal court. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, but we're going to see a lot of back and forth here.
Well, and I was just going to say, this is all unfolding in the public arena, right? And so, I mean, how hard is it going to be for both sides to prove their point?
I think to get there, to prove their point, you're going to have to see depositions. You're going to have to, you know, there's going to be a discovery, sharing of evidence from both sides, right? But I think lawyers are going to have conversations with Lively's team and Baldoni's team in terms of, is this going to help or hurt the reputation going forward?
Right.
Does it make sense to maybe have some kind of private, confidential mediation where both sides sit in a room with a judge, impartial judge, and air it out, see if we can settle it privately? Because this is not going to help either side here.
I was going to say reputation. I feel like after this is already tarnished.
Yeah, for sure. There's questions about Lively's commitment to, you know, the movie.
Right.
That's, you know, and Baldoni's saying that's what really prompted her to manufacture this complaint, you know, that he was engaged in sexual harassment. So it is. I mean, this is the kind of situation where I think lawyers are going to look at a cost-benefit scenario in terms of, you know, does it make sense to go forward?
Right.
And, you know, they have a lot at stake. I mean, future movies and revenue and so.
Yeah, I mean, it could have, you know, a ripple effect and a lot of consequences.
For sure.
But, you know, I mean, again, I know it may be too early to tell, but how do you think this will end?
I don't see it going into court and having a jury hear this.
Oh.
I think this is something, again, that the parties are going to sit down and say, okay, there's going to be a cooling off period. What isn't helping right now is, you know, both sides feel like there's still smear going on.
Yeah.
There was an allegation by Lively's team saying that Baldoni's lawyer is releasing information that he shouldn't be releasing, and that they want him gagged in terms of making any affirmative statements. That just doesn't help.
Okay.
Time is going to heal this, and we'll see. But I think in a couple of weeks we'll be talking about this thing in mediation.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon.
Right.
Now to President Trump's executive orders as he takes sweeping action to fulfill his campaign promises to transform the federal government. So let's hit some of the boldest and most controversial actions, starting with Trump's executive order to end birthright citizenship. Today, a federal judge issued a temporary restraining order against Trump's executive order. Defense attorney Hector Diaz of Diaz Law joins me now. All right, Hector, explain first of all what this temporary restraining order does from what this federal judge did.
It simply blocks the enforcement of the executive order. So if, let's pretend that, you know, this wasn't litigated in the district court there in the state of Washington, then ultimately it would go into effect. They would try to enforce it. That's a whole nother issue in terms of how you enforce and, you know, determine birthright citizenship, and that's a whole nother issue. But this restraining order basically says we're going to pause it. This is, you know, there's a preliminary determination that this is blatantly unconstitutional.
Right, against the 14th Amendment.
Right, but they're going to allow the parties to brief the issue further. They're likely going to have a hearing and then the court will make a determination at that point whether to continue not just with the temporary restraining order, but in fact to find that this executive order is unconstitutional.
So, I mean, the fact that, and Arizona is involved in this as well, you've got attorneys general from 22 states, including us. What do you think will happen? I mean, with these executive orders, obviously all these lawsuits happening, I mean, what kind of a ripple effect will that have?
I think it's important, looking at the order that was issued by the federal court, the court made the statement, which I think there's some truth to this, which is, did any lawyer review this before it got issued, before this executive order got issued? Because there's precedent, there is constitutional precedent that if you're born in the U.S., you're a U.S. citizen. And so, there was a little bit of discussion in terms of the phrase that, Trump and Trump's administrations are grabbing onto, but there is just a mountain of precedent that counters that notion. So I think it will play itself out. It will be briefed. I think you're going to see President Trump and the administration kind of really go on a PR effort to explain this. But in the end, I'm not going to be surprised if this is found unconstitutional and this is just another, they'll let it go by the wayside.
Okay. I want to get to another action that is affecting 170 million Americans, TikTok users. President Trump signed an executive order seeking to delay the ban by 75 days that was supposed to be shut down last Sunday. Hector, I remember last week, you were saying, I don't believe it's going to go dark. And really, it didn't. So here comes another deadline. Now what?
I think even prior to that pronouncement, the TikTok officials and some of Trump's administration, even though they hadn't officially gone into office, were talking about how this was going to work out.
Right.
And quickly, President Trump's team pushed out that they could see a viable kind of joint partnership, 50-50 partnership with some U.S. company. And that's what's being hammered out here. That has to be what's hammered out. There's too much money on the table for ByteDance to just simply look the other way and say, you know what, we're done, we're going to pull out. Thank you so much. They realize that TikTok's important to the U.S. consumer, and there's a lot of money to be made.
Yeah, and a lot of people would be really upset. Speaking of a buyer, there's been a string of names being rumored to buy TikTok. We're talking Elon Musk, even Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank. You've got Mr. Beast. He just got his name in the fray. Now, Trump has said, as you said, the U.S. government should own half of TikTok's U.S. business in return for keeping the app alive, or else he said that he could impose tariffs on China if there's no deal. Do you think that would happen? That, that possibly somebody here will buy it?
I think it's more likely that you have a U.S.-based company.
Okay. Not a sole owner.
Distinction being the U.S. government, right? I know there's been some conversation about whether the U.S. government could come in as an owner. I think there are all sorts of issues and constitutional issues and things that would just prevent that. But I do think we're going to see probably a strong U.S. buyer here in the next week or so.
In the next week?
Yeah.
All right. Well, then we'll talk about it next week. Okay, so let's get to our last case. In an attempt to crack down on immigration, President Trump authorized ICE to target courthouses, schools, and churches. It revokes a directive that was enacted back in 2011, which prohibited ICE and Customs and Border Patrol officers from arresting suspected undocumented immigrants in a variety of locations. What kind of effect do you think this will have?
Yeah, it's going to have a ripple effect in terms of, maybe kids not going to school, parents not wanting to take their children to schools.
There's already that fear. Yeah.
Right. And, to the extent that these hospitals and churches have served as sanctuaries, maybe people aren't going to go to the hospital if, they have some concern that ICE might be there waiting for them. And so, it's a question of whether or not, we are hearing some information that it's being enforced already, that there's some concern that ICE is showing up. There's also concern whether or not some of these businesses or churches or city governments are actually going to cooperate. Will they let ICE into the door? That's a whole nother issue in terms of it. And I know President Trump and then his administration has said, if anybody interferes with us, we're going to arrest public officials on this. So it is, every day we're going to be hearing about something new, something, progressive, something different coming out of that administration. It's going to be must-see TV in terms of, what we see here.
Well, and in fact, the fact that he's broadening this strict kind of sweeping of illegal immigrants, that just, I would think, puts more of a strain on resources too. But on the flip side, I'm wondering, what about the rights of, these immigrants? Do they have any?
Yes and no. giving you the lawyerly response, yes
Right.
and no. To the extent that they're contacted by an ICE official, they have the right to remain silent. They don't have to, discuss where they're from. There's certain, to the extent that they're arrested, they would then be given certain immigration rights in terms of maybe requesting an immigration hearing. So there are rights in that regard. Are they the full, rights that a U.S. citizen is given? No.
Right.
But there are rights, and we're going to hear more about this because I think this is something that I think the Trump administration is going to dig in on.
Yeah, and it could have a big effect right here in Arizona, obviously.
Absolutely.
All right, Hector, thank you so much for your deep dive. We appreciate it.